The committee will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2E and House Rule 11, the chair announces that she may postpone roll call votes. Pursuant to notice, the committee meets to consider the following measures. H.R. 4373, Engineering, Biology, Research, and Development Act of 2019. H.R. 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act, and H.R. 4355, Identifying Outputs of Generative Adversarial Networks Act. Welcome to today's Science Committee markup for these three bipartisan bills. First, we'll consider H.R. 4373, the Engineering, Biology, Research, and Development Act of 2019. Engineering biology has the potential to address some of the most serious challenges facing our nation, from food production to environmental cleanup, to clean energy, and of course, health care. It will also drive our economy in the 21st century. U.S. revenues from engineered biological systems reached at least $388 billion in 2017. H.R. 4373 creates the foundation for U.S. leadership in the bioeconomy while also ensuring that the United States is positioned to lead global discussions about responsible development and governance of engineering biology. H.R. 4373 would establish a federal engineering biology research initiative and require a national strategy for our investments and a framework for interagency coordination. The legislation would also expand public-private partnerships and expand education and training for the next generation of engineering biology researchers. It authorized mission-relevant activities for several agencies within the jurisdiction of this committee. Finally, throughout the legislation, we ensure that the initiative would address potential ethical, legal, environmental, safety, and security issues associated with engineering biology research. Next, we will consider H.R. 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act. Our nation's underrepresented minority students have long been an underutilized resource for STEM talent. For our country to remain competitive in the 21st century, this situation must change. Fortunately, America's minority-serving institutions have been working for decades to prepare underrepresented minority students to enter STEM fields. Our MSIs have helped advance participation in STEM fields by developing tried and true models for inclusive curriculum, effective student mentoring, and fostering a welcoming campus climate. The MSI STEM Achievement Act provides for increased transparency, accountability, and accessibility of federal STEM education and research funding for the MSIs. The bill directs the Government Accountability Office to compile an inventory of federal science agency programs targeted to MSIs and to make recommendation for steps agencies can take to encourage increased participation and access for the MSIs in these programs. The National Science Foundation is authorized to support research on the challenges and successes of the MSIs and have had in contributing to the STEM workforce, including approaches to build research competitiveness for them. Finally, the bill directs the Office of Science and Technology Policy to develop a government-wide strategic plan and sustained outreach program to support STEM education and research at the MSIs. The last bill we consider today is H.R. 4355, the Identifying Outputs of Generative Adversarial Networks Act. This very technical topic is more commonly known as deep fakes. The National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Standards and Technology both have critical roles to play in the research and standards development to counter the spread and consequences of deep fakes. Importantly, this legislation also emphasizes public-private partnerships in this area. I want to thank Mr. Gonzalez and his bipartisan co-sponsors for introducing this good bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I think these are all good bills, and I look forward to a productive markup today. I now recognize our ranking member, Mr. Lucas, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for holding this markup. Today we'll consider three bipartisan bills. The first is H.R. 4373, the Engineering, Biology, Research, and Development Act of 2019. I'm proud to join Chairwoman Johnson as well as Representatives Jim Sensenbrenner and Zoe Lofgren in introducing this bill. H.R. 4373 promotes a national research strategy around engineering biology to ensure that the U.S. remains the global leader in biology and biotechnology. I will speak further on this bill when it's brought up for consideration in a moment. Our second bill this morning is H.R. 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act, sponsored by Chairwoman Johnson and Representative Michael Waltz. The bill continues our committee's bipartisan work to support, encourage, and develop the next generation of STEM students. Minority-serving institutions, including historically, I should say, black colleges and universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, and tribal colleges and universities have a long record of success in recruiting, training, and graduating underrepresented students in STEM fields. In my own district, I have seen the unique value of minority-serving institutions. For more than 100 years, Langston University, a historically black college and land-grant institution, has educated students of all backgrounds and influenced people's lives beyond the boundaries of the classroom in service to the community in both rural and urban Oklahoma. This legislation will help schools like Langston prepare their students to fill the STEM jobs of the 21st century. I want to thank the Chairwoman and Mr. Waltz for their work on this legislation and urge my colleagues to support it. Finally, we'll consider H.R. 4355, the Identifying Outputs of Generative Adversarial Networks Act, introduced by Representative Anthony Gonzalez. Generative adversarial networks use machine learning to manipulate videos and other digital context to produce misleading and false products, commonly known as deepfakes. These technologies are becoming more sophisticated and in the wrong hands. They represent a serious security threat. Bad actors already seek to use disinformation to disrupt civil society and sow division among Americans. This bill supports the fundamental research necessary to better understand the underlying technology, to develop tools to identify manipulated content, and to better understand how humans interact with this generated content. The bill also tasks NIST with bringing together the private sector and government agencies to discuss how to responsibly advance innovation in this area. I applaud Mr. Gonzalez's bipartisan work on this bill and his leadership on the issue of technology and security. I appreciate his staff working with committee staff on both sides of the aisle to address technical feedback from the agencies in an amendment that we'll take up later. Finally, I want to thank the Chairwoman and her staff for working in a bipartisan and collaborative fashion on these three bills. Today's markup demonstrates what we can accomplish in this committee when we work together on our shared priority of maintaining American leadership in science and technology. And with that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We now will consider H.R. 4373, the Engineering, Biology, Research, and Development Act of 2019. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 4373, a bill.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendments at any point. I recognize myself briefly to speak on this bill. I've already made some comments on the importance of the issue of national competitiveness. Other countries have already made investing in engineering biology a national priority for some years now. China recently reported that their bioeconomy is growing by 15% annually and is expected to generate $1.6 trillion in revenues in 2020. It is past time for the United States to recognize the significance of this emerging area of research. The committee undertook a months-long effort to seek expert input and update the legislation before us to reflect the current state of science and technology and to adequately address the full suite of societal issues. I want to thank Ranking Member Lucas and his staff for partnering with us in this effort. I also want to thank Mr. Sensenbrenner and Ms. Lofgren for joining us as original co-sponsors, and Ms. Hill, Mr. Foster, Mr. Fitzpatrick, and Ms. Gonzalez-Colon for also co-sponsoring the measure. 4373 has already been endorsed by the Biotechnology Innovation Organization and several other important groups. I'll put the full list into the record. This is a good bipartisan bill and an important step in ensuring U.S. leadership in the bioeconomy of the 21st century. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. If anyone would wish to be recognized,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In both the House Agriculture Committee and the Science Committee, we've discussed biotechnology research and regulation for years. But I can't remember a more exciting and challenging time for the field than today. New gene editing techniques like CRISPR and the advancement of rapid genetic sequencing are driving innovations in agriculture, medicine, energy, and manufacturing. The U.S. was a key driver of biology innovation in the 20th century. But there is an increasing global competition. Other countries recognize the benefits of biotechnology and are striving to capture this potential, its potential through new investments and friendly regulations. We must keep pace and set a research and regulatory framework that supports innovation, creates a marketplace for new ideas and products, while setting the safety and ethical standards for the world to follow. H.R. 4373, the Engineering, Biology, Research, and Development Act, will help us meet those challenges. The bill authorizes a coordinated federal research initiative to ensure that the United States remains the leader in engineering biology. Next month, the White House is convening a summit with the nation's foremost bioeconomy leaders from industry, academia, and government for discussion on maintaining American economic and security leadership in biology. I hope that summit, along with this bill, will build momentum for a serious national public-private effort to advance and protect the U.S. bioeconomy. I'm pleased this bill has gained the endorsement of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, and other biology stakeholders. I look forward to working with the chairwoman to move this bill forward in the House and the Senate, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now proceed with the amendments in order on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the chair. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to H.R. 4373, offered by Ms. Johnson.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, so ordered. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. This amendment makes technical corrections to the underlying legislation. In addition, it adds curriculum development for secondary education and engineering biology to the list of activities to be supported by the National Science Foundation. Finally, it updates the required study by the National Academies to include recommendations for researchers on how best to incorporate consideration of ethical and other societal issues into the design and conduct of their research. I want to thank Ranking Member Lucas for working with me on this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you working with us through the process to address stakeholder feedback. This amendment makes further improvements to the bill in response to their comments, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The vote now occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If no, a reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 4373 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor, motion by signifying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table, and I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary minority and additional views on the measure. We will now consider H.R. 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 4372, a bill.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself to briefly talk on the bill. As I previously noted, we have to engage our full citizenry if we want to have a competitive STEM workforce. Minority-serving institutes provide a ready means to tap into groups that are underrepresented in the STEM fields. This bill will help us do just that. I want to thank Representative Walsh for joining me in introducing this bill and for his leadership on this issue. I also want to thank Representative Tonko, Fitzpatrick, Cohn, Foster, and Jackson Lee for agreeing to co-sponsor the bill. Finally, I want to thank the following organizations for endorsing the bill: the United Negro College Fund, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, the Computing Alliance for Hispanic Serving Institutions, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and the STEM Education Coalition. I'm grateful to all of you and many other stakeholders for providing valuable input and feedback on this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this important bill. Anyone wish to be recognized? Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And as the Republican lead on H.R. 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act, I want to thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas, for working with me to improve participation in STEM at minority-serving institutions. As we've discussed, the supply of STEM workers is not keeping pace with the rapidly evolving needs of our 21st century economy, resulting in a STEM skill shortage. In fact, over the next decade, the STEM shortage is anticipated to reach 1 million professionals, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The STEM workforce, in addition to its overall shortage, has a diversity problem. Minorities are severely underrepresented in STEM fields, only accounting for 11% of the workforce, and therefore a much stronger national commitment to increasing diversity in the STEM workforce is needed to help address these shortages. The MSI STEM Achievement Act seeks to fulfill a more concerted national commitment by focusing on minority-serving institutions like Bethune-Cookman University in my district in Daytona Beach. MSIs currently enroll nearly 30% of all undergraduate students in the U.S. higher education system and play a critical role in providing pathways to STEM-related education, training, and careers for students of color. This proposal, this bill, seeks to increase capacity for students in STEM curricula, encourage partnerships with industry and federal laboratories, and establish liaisons for MSIs within the federal science agencies. All of these things will improve participation in successful STEM programs. These are goals that the White House shares and have included in their December 2018 strategy report on increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM education. And they've also reiterated it in their 2019 National Academies of Sciences report on strengthening the STEM workforce. Additionally, we included many of the White House Office of Science and Technology policy and the National Science Foundation recommendations in this bipartisan bill. I am proud to have worked with the chairwoman and the ranking member on this proposal. I look forward to doing more to encourage STEM workforce development. Chairwoman Johnson, just in the remainder of my time, I digress for a bit. I promise not to lose focus on getting this bill signed into law, but I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention the importance of focusing on female participation in STEM, leveraging private sector best practices, and encouraging female students in STEM at a very young age. I have said in this committee room multiple times this year, and will continue to say, from my experience across the globe, fighting and being involved in third world countries and in developing nations all over the world, where women thrive in business, civil society, and politics, good things happen, and extremism does not thrive. And so for that reason, diversity in STEM must be a national security issue. In my district in Volusia County, just north of Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, we are seeing countless businesses participate in workforce development programs like the Space Coast Consortium Apprenticeship Program, This program and others are making huge strides to advance STEM curriculum and workforce development. And in my view, there is no better example of engaging youth at the elementary, at a very young age, at the elementary and middle school age in STEM than in my district where we have the Burns Science and Technology Charter School. I want to close by urging my colleagues to support HR 4372. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anyone else seeking recognition? No. We will now proceed with the amendments in order of the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the chair, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to HR 4372.
I ask unanimous consent to dispose of the reading, and without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes myself for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. The amendment includes a provision to authorize appropriations for the National Science Foundation to carry out the activities in the Act. The amendment provides $170 million in fiscal year 2020 with a $5 million per year increase over the subsequent 4 years. The amounts of the modest increase in funding for the NSF portfolio of programs targeted to support STEM education for research at the MSIs. I think it is important that we signal to the National Science Foundation that funding is needed in this area, and I urge support of this amendment. I might further say, Mr. Walsh, I meant to mention this earlier, the STEM Opportunities Act is on the floor tomorrow that focuses a great deal on women. Is there any further discussion on this amendment?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to speak in support of the amendment. I again appreciate you and your staff working with us on a bipartisan consensus on the authorization of appropriation levels for this bill. This amendment may give the appropriators and the National Science Foundation a good and realistic roadmap for implementing the legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you. Are there any other persons seeking recognition? Seeing none, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. A reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report 4372 as amended to the House, and the recommendation that it be approved. Those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table, and I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary, minority, and additional views on the measure. HR 4355 is now in consideration. The Identifying Outputs of Generative, Adversarial, and Networks Act. Adversarial Networks Act. The clerk will report the bill.
HR 4355, a bill.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I will recognize the bill's sponsor, Mr. Gonzalez, to speak on the bill.
Thank you. I want to thank Ranking Member Lucas, Chairwoman Johnson, my colleagues in this committee and committee staff from both sides of the aisle for their input in writing this legislation and for allowing for its full consideration. I urge my colleagues to support my legislation, the Identifying Outputs of Generative Adversarial Networks Act, a bit of a tongue twister as we're all trying to pronounce it, but to direct research on the underlying technology used to produce deepfakes. The IOGAN Act will allow us to develop much-needed tools to identify authentic videos, voice reproduction, or photos generated by deepfakes. Deepfakes are not a new phenomenon. I assume most of you have seen the movie Forrest Gump. It's one of my favorites of all time. If you'll remember some of the famous scenes where Forrest Gump was filmed shaking hands with various presidents, was fighting in Vietnam, and all sorts of different things throughout the video. At the time, the technique was revolutionary, and it was incredibly expensive and difficult to reproduce. to the point that really only big Hollywood studios with massive budgets could afford to produce deepfakes with such images. So fast forward a few decades later, after Forrest Gump, and we now live in a world where advances in technology and computing power have increased exponentially. This increase in power has enabled techniques like GANs to be developed, making deepfakes easier and cheaper than ever to be produced and disseminated on the internet. Techniques to produce deepfakes are constantly improving and has made it extremely difficult to distinguish between fact and fiction. Experts say that eventually techniques will get so refined that deepfakes will be indistinguishable from real recordings, pictures, or videos. Given the national security and societal implications that deepfakes can pose for our country, my legislation directs the NSF, in consultation with other federal agencies, to conduct research on the science and ethics of deepfakes. This includes fundamental research on digital forensic tools and social and behavioral research on the human engagement with the networks. My bill also directs NIST to support research for the development of measurements and standards necessary to accelerate the advance of the technological tools to examine the function and outputs of any type of deepfake technology. The legislation also directs NSF and NIST to jointly submit a report on the feasibility of research opportunities through public-private partnerships. The goal here is to identify new emerging technologies that could produce deepfakes by using different techniques. The report shall also provide Congress with any recommendations that could facilitate and improve the communication and coordination between the private sector and federal agencies to devise innovative techniques in the detection of deepfakes. Finally, I would like to add that the ability to identify and label deepfake content is critical to preventing foreign actors or terrorist organizations from using manipulated media to influence U.S. public opinion. I'm proud to see the Iogan Act addressing the needs to educate and train a new type of workforce in digital forensics, which will be a profession that will be in greater demand for many years to come. One of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle likes to say, if we're going to be divided, gosh dang it, it better be with real information and among Americans. While that is, you know who I'm talking about. And I share that. And so this bill, my hope is, will be a factor in making sure that the content that's being produced and presented into our public discourse is genuine and real. I also want to take the time to thank Representatives Stevens, Baird, and Katie Hill for their support. With that, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4355, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to be recognized?
Chairwoman Johnson, I move to strike the last word.
Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson. I'm proud to lead on this bill with my friend Congressman Anthony Gonzalez to promote national security and combat malicious use of general adversarial networks. And he's absolutely right that we all love the movie Forrest Gump, but can recognize that the complicated and oftentimes expensive technology of big Hollywood has gotten into the hands of individual actors for bad intent and to confuse citizens. So this bill supports critical research to identify manipulated media content known as deep fakes that threaten to erode public discord, scam the American public, and endanger our national security. Deepfake technology has developed rapidly over the past several years with no clear method of identifying and stopping it from becoming a major national security threat. H.R. 4355, the Identifying Outputs of General Adversarial Network Act, directs the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology to support research to accelerate the development of technologies that could improve the detection of deep fakes. And what incredible agencies to do that work. So we're confident that this bill is a step in the right direction to tackle these challenges. Advancements in computing power and the widespread use of technologies like artificial intelligence particularly over the last several years, have made it easier and cheaper more than ever before to manipulate and reproduce photographs, videos, and audio clips that are potentially harmful or deceptive to the American public. Deep fake videos have also been used to alter footage of celebrities, politicians, and CEOs to confuse or scam the American people, and the technology is quickly evolving to be able to mimic any person to create false footage of words and actions. So it's not only time for us to study this, but it's also time for us to certainly get serious and to develop some standards and cybersecurity controls. The ability to identify and label this content is critical to preventing bad actors from using manipulated images and videos for disinformation campaigns, blackmail, and other malicious activities. So again, I'd like to thank the fellow leaders on this bill, Mr. Gonzalez, Ms. Hill, and Dr. Baird, for taking action on such an important topic to preserve our national security and public trust, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else seeking time? We will now proceed with the amendments in order on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio, and he's recognized to offer an amendment.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson. My amendment looks to include technical feedback. Sorry. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4355, offered by Mr. Gonzalez.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, so ordered. We recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson. My amendment looks to include technical feedback provided by NSF, NIST, and outside experts, and improves the underlying legislation. This will not take 5 minutes. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I support the amendment, and I thank the gentleman for working with me and my staff on both the amendment and the underlying bill. Is there any other discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the gentleman's amendment in the nature of a substitute. This amendment makes improvements to the bill based on agency and stakeholder feedback, as well as input from committee staff on both sides of the aisle. I want to thank Mr. Gonzalez and his staff for working with us on this amendment, and thank you, Chairman Johnson, for marking up this bill today. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment as well as the other 2 amendments that will be offered to this bill. All will further improve this good piece of legislation. With that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there any other comments? We will move to the next amendment and vote on the Gonzalez amendment later, the Buyer amendment. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. He's recognized to offer an amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, and without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, the potential for serious harm with these deep fakes is quite great in our elections, on an international stage, and for diplomatic purposes, and even for our private lives. As a country, we need to take swift action and invest in the research and tools for identifying and combating deep fakes. We need a national strategy immediately, especially for election integrity ahead of the 2020 presidential election. So I really thank my colleagues and my friend from Ohio for his bill directing the National Science Foundation and NIST to research deepfakes and how we can combat them. My amendment would simply add 1 area of research for the National Science Foundation to pursue related to technical tools, especially watermarking, to combat deepfakes. Watermarking technology is essentially an anti-tampering feature built into the image or the code of the image or the video as it comes from the camera. So anytime an adjustment to the original is attempted, it's clear in the file's metadata. And we need more research into this technology to explore its feasibility as a solution for the deepfake identification challenge. Very little, if any, research has been done on the watermarking of dangerous deepfake videos, so I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amendment? If not, the chair recognizes, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment is the Western Amendment on the roster and offered by the gentlelady from Virginia, and she's recognized to offer her amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 3, amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4355.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for introducing this important legislation, which I am very honored to co-sponsor. As my colleagues have already noted this morning, technology for computer-generated fake content is moving at a speed that is outpacing the tools we have available to detect it. Meanwhile, it's become much easier for bad actors to create manipulated content. The underlying bill will help mitigate those problems, but in addition to developing new technologies, we need to teach Americans how to detect manipulated content that seeks to spread disinformation in the first place. So my amendment would add language directing the NSF to support research on the public understanding and awareness of deepfake content, as well as best practices for educating the public on how to discern the authenticity of digital content. This is a critical component to our national security deterrence strategy to combat disinformation campaigns, because the more education and awareness we have, the better we can strengthen and safeguard our democracy. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you. Just quickly, I appreciate my colleagues' amendment, both amendments on the bill and their engagement on this important issue. I support the amendment as it strengthens the underlying legislation, and I appreciate the bipartisan nature with which we've gone forward. So I look forward to working with everyone, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. We will now vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute ordered by Mr. Gonzalez as amendment. The vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments? If no, then a reporting quorum being present, I move that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 4355 as amendment to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplementary, minority, or additional views on the measure. I want to thank the members for their attendance this morning. That concludes our markup. The committee is adjourned.